The wind moved through the broken city, carrying dust and the smell of burned stone. She walked slowly, her steps heavy, her body weak from hunger. Her skin, pale and strange compared to humans, was covered in torn cloth. She was a widow. An alien widow left alone after the war. Her husband had died fighting humans, leaving her with nothing, no family, no food, no reason to hope. Every day she searched for something to eat, but the ruins were empty. The war had taken everything, even the fruit trees were dead. She felt her stomach twist in pain, but she kept walking. Her people once spoke with pride, but now their voices were silent. She was one of the last in this place, and she was starving. Sometimes she thought it would be easier to fall to the ground and never rise again. But then she saw smoke in the distance. It was not from fire. It was from cooking. From human cooking. Her heart jumped with fear, for she had been told all humans were dangerous, yet hunger was stronger than fear. She moved closer, step by step, until she saw them. A human village, small and simple, with fields of grain and wooden houses. She wanted to turn away, but her legs betrayed her. She took one more step and then another, drawn by the smell of food. And then she froze because she saw a child. A little human girl was standing not far from her, holding a piece of bread. The girl's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something else. Curiosity. Maybe kindness. The widow's lips trembled. She could not remember the last time anyone looked at her without hate. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Only silence. The little girl walked closer, her small hand holding the bread tight. The widow whispered inside her mind, "Go back, child. Do not come near me." But the child did not stop. Instead, she smiled, and in a soft voice, she said, "If you marry my dad, you can eat with us forever." The widow stared, her heart shaking. She did not understand. She thought it must be a trick. She thought maybe humans wanted to capture her. Maybe they would laugh at her hunger. But the girl's eyes were too honest. The bread in her hand smelled real. The smile on her face was pure. The widow felt her knees grow weak, almost falling to the ground. She wanted to run away, but she could not move. She wanted to shout, but she could not speak. The girl simply waited, holding the bread higher. The widow's empty stomach cried out louder than her fear. Finally, with shaking hands, she reached forward. Her long alien fingers touched the warm bread. She took it, and for the first time in many months, she tasted food. Tears burned her eyes as she ate. The little girl clapped her hands, happy to see her eat. The widow wanted to thank her, but the words would not come. The girl laughed and pointed back toward the village. "My dad is there," she said. "Come with me. I want you to meet him." The widow froze again. Meet her father? A human man? It sounded dangerous. She remembered her husband's last words. "Humans will never accept us," but the little girl pulled her hand, gently but firmly. Her touch was warm, not hateful. The widow did not have the strength to resist. Step by step, she followed. As they entered the village, human eyes turned. Men and women stopped their work to stare at the strange figure. Whispers spread quickly. An alien. Here? Why is she with the girl? The widow felt every look cut into her. She wanted to turn and flee, but the little girl held her hand tighter. The girl was not afraid, and that gave the widow a small light of courage. The houses smelled of food, of safety. But the air was heavy with suspicion. Every step deeper into the village was like walking into fire. At last they reached the farmhouse. Standing at the edge of the fields, a tall man stepped out, the girl's father. His eyes were tired, his face marked by sorrow. He saw the widow and his hand moved to the axe at his side. The widow stopped breathing. The girl shouted, "Dad, she is hungry. I gave her bread." The man looked from his daughter to the alien woman. The silence stretched long, heavy as stone. The widow waited for the anger, the rejection, maybe even death. But instead, the man slowly lowered his hand. He did not smile, but he did not send her away. He said only one word. "Why?" The widow could not answer. Not yet. The story between them had only just begun. The man stood tall at the door of his farmhouse. His eyes were sharp, his body strong from years of work in the fields. He carried sorrow in his face, the kind of sorrow that never leaves. He had lost his wife during the war, and since then he spoke little. His daughter was his only light, the reason he woke each day. But now, she was standing beside an alien widow, holding her hand as if they were family. The villagers had followed, their voices rising with suspicion. "Send her away," one shouted. "She is dangerous." "She is not welcome here," another whispered. The alien widow lowered her head, her hands trembling. She wanted to vanish into the earth, but the little girl pulled her forward. "Dad, please," the girl begged. "She was hungry. I gave her bread. She is kind." The man's gaze did not move from the widow, her strange skin, her haunted eyes, her body weak from hunger. He could see she was no warrior now, no threat. But still he felt the weight of the war on his shoulders. This woman's kind had killed his people, destroyed towns, taken lives. Could he allow one of them to step inside his home? The villagers pressed closer, their anger growing. "If you let her in, she will call more of her kind. She will poison us, she will steal." The widow's chest tightened. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but her throat was locked. By fear and shame, she could only stand, silent, waiting for judgment. The man raised his hand and the villagers fell quiet. His voice was calm but carried weight. "She is weak," he said. "She cannot harm us tonight." He looked down at his daughter, her innocent eyes begging him. Finally, he stepped aside, his voice low. "One meal," he said. "That is all." The widow entered slowly, her heart pounding. The farmhouse smelled of warmth, of bread, of safety. She could hardly believe she was walking into a human home. The little girl smiled and guided her to the table. The father placed a bowl of stew before her. The widow's hands shook as she lifted the spoon. She had not tasted real food, and so long she felt tears rising again. The little girl watched with delight. "You see, Dad, she's not bad." The man said nothing, only studied the widow as she ate. He saw the way she held herself, cautious, broken. He saw her eyes, filled with pain but also something else. A quiet strength, a will to survive. Night came. The wind rattled the windows. The villagers were not finished. Outside, whispers turned to plans. "She must leave before morning," they hissed. "We cannot allow her to stay." Some spoke of driving her out with fire, others with blades. The widow heard their voices through the walls. Her hands grew cold, her heart heavy. She thought of leaving, of slipping away into the night. It would be easier, she told herself. But when she looked at the little girl asleep by the fire, she could not move. The child had given her kindness when no one else would. How could she abandon that kindness so quickly? The father sat across from her, sharpening his old axe. The sound of stone against metal was slow and steady. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "You should not be here," he said. The widow bowed her head. "I know," she whispered inside her heart. But then he added, "And yet, my daughter smiles again for the first time in many months." The word struck her deeper than any blade. She wanted to tell him about her husband, about her people, about the loneliness that had eaten her soul. But her mouth stayed closed. Instead, she only looked into the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes like memories of a home long gone. The man watched her silently. He did not see an enemy in that moment. He saw another broken soul like himself. Outside, footsteps moved closer. The villagers had gathered, their anger ready to burn. The widow heard them, and her body stiffened. She turned to the man, her voice finally breaking free. "They will come for me," she said. "If I stay, your home will burn." Her voice was soft but full of truth. The man's hand tightened on the axe. He met her eyes, and for the first time, there was no hate in them. Only a strange question, one he could not yet speak. The night grew heavy, every sound sharp as a blade. The little girl stirred in her sleep, unaware of the danger outside. The widow stood, ready to leave, to sacrifice herself to protect them. But then the man said, "Wait." His voice was steady, carrying weight. "You warned me not for yourself but for us." He placed the axe on the table, sliding it toward her. "If you wish to protect this house, then take it." The widow froze, her hand hovering over the weapon. It was the first time a human had ever trusted her with anything. Her chest ached with emotions she could not name, and outside, the footsteps stopped. The whispers grew louder. The danger was at the door. The night was about to decide whether she would remain an outcast or become something else. The night outside the farmhouse was restless. The villagers gathered in small groups, whispering, carrying torches, their shadows stretching long across the ground. They had not forgotten the war. They had not forgiven. To them, the alien widow was a danger, a curse that had stepped into their peaceful lives. And yet, inside the farmhouse there was silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The widow sat near the flames, her hands folded tightly. The axe rested on the table beside her, heavy, waiting. She had never thought a human would trust her with a weapon. Her husband had always said humans would kill before they trusted, but this man had done the opposite. She could not understand it, and it unsettled her more than anger would have. Though, Father moved quietly, placing more wood on the fire. His face was unreadable, his eyes thoughtful. He did not speak. Not yet. He simply looked at her, as if trying to decide who she truly was, an enemy or something else. The little girl woke from her sleep, her hair messy, her eyes heavy with dreams. She ran to the widow and hugged her arm without fear. The widow froze at the sudden warmth, the child's small fingers wrapped around her, and for a moment, the widow felt something she thought she had lost forever, a piece of family. The father saw this, and his eyes softened, if only for a second. But outside, voices grew louder. "They will not wait until morning." The widow whispered, her voice low. "They will come." The man nodded. He had heard them too. Still, his hand did not reach for the axe. Instead, he said, "Eat more. You will need your strength." She stared at him, confused. Why offer her food when danger was near? Why treat her like a guest? When the village wanted her gone, her people had never spoken of humans this way. They were supposed to be merciless. But this man was different. It frightened her, because she did not know how to live in a world where enemies could also show kindness. Hours passed slowly. The torches outside faded, but the whispers never stopped. The villagers were waiting for their chance. The widow tried to rest, but each sound of the night made her heart pound. At last she stood and moved toward the door. The father stopped her with his voice, firm but calm. "Where are you going?" "I will leave," she said, her voice heavy. "If I go, they will not harm your home." Her hand rested on the wooden door, ready to step into the cold night. But the man rose and shook his head. "My daughter gave you bread," he said. "You saved her joy. I will not repay that with betrayal." The words cut through her stronger than any blade. She turned, her eyes wide, her throat tight. Her husband had once promised to protect her, but he was gone. Now, a human, her enemy, was saying something similar. She stepped back from the door, her chest heavy with confusion. She did not know whether to trust him. But before she could answer, the little girl spoke, her sleepy voice breaking the silence. "Stay, please," she whispered. "Don't go, I like you." The widow's knees almost gave way. No one had spoken to her with such simple honesty in a long time. Her heart ached with a warmth she was afraid to accept. Later that night, as the fire burned low, she could not sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the dark fields. That was when she heard them, the whispers of men outside, closer now, sharper. "We strike before dawn." One voice said, "We burn the farmhouse, the alien will flee, and the problem will end." The widow's hands trembled, her breath shallow. They would come, and it would not be long. She turned back toward the father, who was sitting quietly, sharpening his knife. Her voice shook as she said, "They plan to burn your home." He looked up, calm, as though he had already expected this. His eyes met hers, steady, strong. "And yet you told me," he said. "You could have left and saved yourself, but you warned me." His words carried weight, heavy with meaning. For the first time since the war, the widow felt her actions mattered. The man pushed the knife aside and reached for the axe. He handed it back to her. "If they come, you will fight beside me," he said. The widow stared at the weapon in her hands. Her people had used weapons against humans and humans against her people. Now a weapon was being given not to kill, but to protect. The thought made her chest tighten. Her heart beat fast, torn between fear and something she dared not name. The night stretched on, heavy with silence. The little girl slept peacefully, unaware of the storm outside. The widow sat near the fire with the axe resting across her knees. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind felt like the beginning of an attack. She thought of her husband, of how he had died in the war. Would he have hated her for standing beside a human? Or would he have understood that survival sometimes required new choices? As dawn neared, the sound of footsteps echoed closer. The villagers were moving, their anger burning. The widow tightened her grip on the axe, her eyes locked with the father's. No words were needed. They both knew the danger was real. They both knew the fight was coming. And in that quiet, in the space between fear and courage, the widow felt something new rising inside her. Not hatred, not hunger, but the beginning of trust. The night faded slowly, and the first gray light of dawn touched the fields. The widow had not closed her eyes. She sat near the fire with the axe resting across. Her knees, every muscle in her body was tense, waiting for the sound of footsteps, waiting for the villagers to come with their fire and their anger. The father rose early, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He looked at the alien woman, her back straight, her jaw tight with fear. "You stayed," he said quietly. "You did not run." She lowered her head, unsure if it was praise or warning. "I stayed," she whispered, "because the child, she wanted me to." The little girl still slept, her small hand clutching a blanket, unaware of the storm outside. The father nodded once, then moved toward the door. "They will test us today," he said. "We must be ready." The widow's grip tightened on the axe. Her heart pounded. The thought of fighting humans felt wrong, but the thought of leaving the girl unprotected felt worse. Outside, the sound of angry voices grew. The villagers had gathered with torches and tools. Some carried blades, some carried burning cloth. Their eyes were filled with fear and fury. They saw the alien widow as a shadow from the war, a reminder of pain they wanted to bury. The father stepped out onto the porch, his voice firm. "This is my house," he said. "You will not touch it." The widow stood just behind him, her body trembling. The villagers shouted back, "She is not one of us. She will bring danger. Send her away." "She belongs to death, not to this village," another cried. The widow's chest tightened, their words cutting deep. The little girl appeared in the doorway, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Her small voice called out, "She is my friend." The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, startled by the innocence of the child. But then anger returned, louder than before. "Do not let the child be fooled. She will destroy us all." The widow stepped forward, her voice breaking the silence. "If I am the danger you fear, then I will leave," she said. Her words shook, but her eyes were steady. "I will not let harm come to this house." The villagers muttered, pleased by her choice, but the father spoke, his voice strong. "No," he said. "She stays." The crowd erupted in anger, but the father's stance was unshaken. He held his axe high, his presence unmovable. The widow's breath caught. No one had ever defended her since her husband died. Not even her own people, but here was a human, her enemy, standing in front of her like a shield. The villagers moved forward, their rage boiling. The widow's hands shook as she lifted the axe. Her heart screamed against it, but her mind whispered, "Protect the girl." The first man rushed, swinging a blade. The widow stepped forward, striking the weapon away with the wooden shaft of the axe. She did not kill, she only defended. The villagers stumbled back, surprised. The fight burned quickly, loud shouts, clashing tools, flying sparks from torches. The widow and the father fought side by side. He struck with his strength, she moved with speed. Each time she defended the door, she thought of the little girl behind it. Each time the father swung his axe, he thought of his daughter's smile. Together they stood as one. At last the villagers fell back, their anger not gone, but their courage broken. One of them shouted, "This is not finished, we will return with soldiers." The warning hung heavy in the morning air. The crowd scattered, leaving smoke and silence. The widow lowered the axe, her hands shaking. She had never thought she would fight to protect humans. Her heart was torn, her chest heavy. But when she looked at the little girl's smile, she felt a warmth stronger than confusion. The father placed his hand on her shoulder. Steady, grounding. "You chose to stand," he said, "that choice matters." The widow could not find words. She only looked at him, her eyes filled with questions she could not speak. The little girl ran forward, hugging them both. "You see?" She laughed. "We are a family already." The widow's throat tightened, her heart aching. Family. The word felt like a dream she had buried long ago, but the warning from the villagers still echoed. Soldiers would come, and soldiers would not show mercy. The peace of the farmhouse was broken. The test had only begun. The widow knew danger was far from over, yet for the first time she felt she was not facing it alone. The morning sun rose over the fields, painting the sky in gold. The farmhouse stood, bruised but unbroken. Inside, a new bond had taken root. Fragile but real, the widow knew the days ahead would bring pain. But in that moment she also knew something else. She had found a place worth protecting. The village was quiet after the fight, but the silence was heavy. The widow knew the battle at the farmhouse had only delayed what was coming. The villagers would not forget, and soldiers would soon arrive. Still, for the first time in years, she did not feel completely alone. The father had stood beside her. The little girl had smiled at her. And inside that small farmhouse, a fragile new life began to grow. The widow decided she would not simply eat and hide. She rose early with the father, working in the fields. Her hands were clumsy at first, unused to the human way of farming. But she learned quickly, copying the father's movements, pulling weeds, carrying water, guiding the plow. The soil stained. Her skin, the sun burned her shoulders. And yet she felt alive again. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering. Some shook their heads in anger, others in disbelief, an alien woman working the land of a human farmer. To them it was an insult, a dangerous game. But the widow ignored their stares. Each seed she planted was a small rebellion against despair. Each step in the field was a promise to repay the kindness she had been given. The little girl followed her everywhere. She laughed as the widow stumbled in the mud. She clapped when the widow lifted heavy buckets of water. And when evening came, she sat beside her asking endless questions. "Do you miss your home? Did you have children? Was your husband kind?" The widow answered only some. The others hurt too much. But the child's curiosity warmed her heart. For the first time, she remembered what it felt like to smile. The father watched quietly, saying little. He worked beside her without complaint. When she failed, he corrected her. When she succeeded, he nodded. His silence was heavy but not unkind. At night, they sat by the fire, sharing food in silence. The widow felt the weight of his presence, steady, strong. She wondered what he thought when he looked at her, enemy, stranger, or something else, but her heart was not at peace. She thought of her husband, the warrior who had died fighting humans. She remembered his face, his voice, his last words. To stand beside a human man now felt like betrayal. Her heart pulled in two directions, loyalty to the dead and the strange new bond with the living. When she closed her eyes at night, she saw both faces, one fading, one growing clearer. It tore her apart. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, she sat outside the farmhouse alone. The father came to her, his hands rough from work, his face tired. "You work hard," he said simply. She looked at him, her chest heavy with unspoken feelings. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you let me stay?" His eyes lingered on hers, steady and unreadable. "Because my daughter smiles when you are here," he said. The words struck deep, but behind them she felt something more, something he did not say. Before she could speak, the sound of horses broke the evening calm. The villagers rushed to the fields, shouting. A patrol of human soldiers had arrived, their armor shining, their faces stern. The widow's blood ran cold. She knew what soldiers did to her kind. She had seen it with her own eyes. They did not ask questions. They gave orders, and those who resisted paid with blood. The soldiers dismounted, their leader stepping forward. "We have been told an alien is hiding here," he declared. His eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and cruel. The villagers pointed toward the farmhouse, eager to prove their loyalty. "There," one shouted. "The farmer keeps her." The widow felt the world tilt around her. She wanted to run, but the little girl grabbed her hand, holding tight. "Don't go," the child whispered, her eyes full of fear. The father stepped forward, standing between the soldiers and the widow. "She is my family," he said, his voice calm but firm. Gasps rose from the villagers. The widow's breath caught in her throat. "Family," the word hung in the air like thunder. The soldier sneered. "Your family, she is the enemy." The father's jaw tightened, his eyes unyielding. "She is under my roof. She is under my protection," he said. The widow's chest ached, her heart racing. This was no longer silence, no longer unspoken. This was open defiance. The soldiers moved forward. But before they could act, a distant horn sounded. All heads turned toward the hills. Smoke rose, dark and thick. The widow's eyes widened. Her stomach dropped. It was not the humans this time. It was her own kind. Alien raiders sweeping down. Upon the village, the humans who hated her, the humans who threatened her, were now about to face the fury of her people. The soldiers cursed and drew their weapons. The villagers screamed and ran to hide. The father turned to her, his voice steady but urgent. "Choose," he said. "Stand with them, or stand with us." The widow gripped the child's hand, her heart breaking under the weight of the choice. Her people's blood ran in her veins. But this human home had given her life again. The fire of war was coming, and her decision would decide not only her fate, but the fate of them all. The sky burned with smoke as the alien raiders swept down from the hills. Their ships were small, but their weapons glowed with deadly light. The village that had feared one alien widow now shook under the power of many. Children screamed, animals scattered, villagers ran in terror. The soldiers who had come to arrest the widow now raised their shields. The father stood firm, gripping his axe while the little girl clung to his leg, and the widow felt her heart twist, for the attackers were her own kind. Her people. The raiders moved fast, breaking doors, stealing food, setting fire to homes. They shouted in a tongue the widow knew well, the language of her birth. For a moment her chest ached, her heart whispered that she belonged with them, but then she saw the little girl crying, her face pale with fear, and she knew that choice was no longer simple. The soldiers pointed at the widow, shouting, "If you are one of them, stop this, prove yourself." The villagers glared, some yelling, "Call them off, or you are a traitor to both." The widow's hands shook, her soul divided. Her people had fought and died against humans, her husband among them. But these humans, this child and her father, had given her food, warmth, and a place to stand. The voices of war clashed inside her, tearing her apart. The raiders reached the farmhouse, their leader stepping forward. He was tall, his armor shining, his face marked with war paint. When his eyes landed on her, he stopped, shock flashing across his face. "Sister," he called, "we thought you dead." The villagers gasped. The soldiers tightened their grip on weapons. The widow's heart sank, for she knew this man. He was her husband's brother, the last of her family. He stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Come, join us. Leave these humans to burn." Her throat closed, her mind spun. Her people offered her blood, her past, her family. But behind her stood the father, steady as stone. Beside her, the child's small hand clung to her sleeve, trembling but trusting. "Don't go," the girl whispered, her voice breaking. And the widow knew she was standing at the edge of two worlds. The soldiers shouted, "Choose now!" The villagers cried, "Send her away, she will betray us." The raiders waited, their weapons humming with power. The widow raised her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I will not leave," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I will fight for this house." Her brother's eyes darkened, betrayal flashing across. His face, "You choose them. After all they have done to us," he roared. But she lifted the axe the father had given her, her voice steady now. "I choose the ones who gave me bread when I was dying." The raiders moved, anger burning, and the battle began. The farmhouse became the center of the storm. The soldiers fought with shields and steel, the villagers with farm tools and fire. The father swung his axe with fury, protecting his daughter, and the widow moved like a shadow, striking fast, blocking blows. She fought not as a raider, not as a human ally, but as something new, a protector. The raider leader roared, charging at her. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying. "You shame our blood," he spat. "You shame your husband's memory." Her heart bled at his words, but her hands did not falter. "My husband died for war," she shouted back. "I will live for peace." With a cry she struck, her axe breaking his weapon aside. The fight raged on, each blow carrying the weight of history. The little girl screamed as flames neared the farmhouse. The widow turned, shielding her with her body. A blast of energy struck her side, burning pain through her flesh. She fell to one knee, her vision blurring. The father rushed to her side, his face stricken. "Stay with me," he whispered, his hand steady on her shoulder. But the raiders closed in, ready to finish what they started. The soldiers fought harder, seeing her stand for them. The villagers, once filled with hate, now raised their tools beside her. For the first time, humans and one alien fought together. The battle was fierce, the air filled with smoke and cries. At last the raiders began to fall back, their leader wounded, their raid broken. They retreated to the hills, leaving behind fire and silence. The widow collapsed, her body weak, her wounds deep. The father caught her before she hit the ground. His hands held her tight, his eyes full of fear and something more. "You saved us," he whispered, his voice raw. The little girl clung to her arm, crying, "Don't leave. You are family now." The widow's vision blurred with tears. Her body was broken, but her heart had never felt stronger. She had chosen, and that choice had given her a place. Not as a widow of war, not as a stranger, but as something more. The soldiers stared, speechless, the villagers silent. They had seen her fight not against them, but for them. And in that silence, something began to change. The lines between enemy and ally blurred. And in the center of it all, the widow lay, in the arms of a man who had once been her enemy. Her pain was great, but her choice was clear. She had chosen love in danger. The village was quiet after the battle. Smoke rose from broken houses, the air heavy with the smell of ash. Children cried softly, and the villagers moved like shadows, gathering what was left. The raiders were gone, but their memory clung to the air like a wound, and at the center of it all, the alien widow lay weak, her body trembling with pain. The father carried her into the farmhouse, his hands steady, his face pale. The little girl ran beside him, tears streaking her cheeks. "Don't let her die," she begged, clutching at his arm. The widow could barely keep her eyes open. Her side burned where the energy blast had struck her. Each breath felt heavy, each heartbeat like a final drum. The villagers gathered outside, whispering. "She fought for us," one said. "She saved my son." Another muttered, "She bled for this place, how can she still be an enemy?" But others shook their heads, their fear not yet gone. "She is dangerous. She will bring more of her kind." The debate swirled like fire and smoke. Inside, the father knelt beside her, cleaning her wound with gentle hands. "You will not die here," he said firmly, his voice shaking only at the edges. The widow looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I was ready to," she whispered. "I thought my story ended long ago." His hand tightened on hers, his gaze steady. "Your story is not finished," he said. "Not if I have a choice." The little girl pressed her face to the widow's arm. "You promised to stay. You can't leave me now," she cried. The widow's chest ached with more than pain. She had lost her husband to war, but now she felt something different. She felt like she had found a family she never expected. Her heart whispered that perhaps survival had led her here for a reason. The next day, soldiers returned, their leader cautious. They had seen her fight. They had seen her save lives. But rules were rules, and orders were clear. Aliens are not to remain among human settlements, the soldier declared. The villagers argued, voices rising. "She is no threat," one cried. "She is family now," said another. But still, fear lingered. Doubt hung heavy. The widow struggled to her feet. Weak but standing, she looked at the soldiers, then at the villagers. Her voice was soft but steady. "I am no soldier anymore," she said. "I am no raider. I am only a widow who wanted bread, who wanted to live." Her eyes found the father and the little girl. "They gave me food, they gave me warmth, they gave me a place when I had nothing." She paused, her chest heaving. "If that is a crime, then let me pay it, but know this. I will not raise a hand against this house, not ever." Silence followed, deep and long. The soldiers shifted, uneasy. The villagers looked at one another, torn between fear and gratitude. And then the father stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. "She is under my roof, she is under my protection. If you take her, you take me too." The little girl ran to his side, shouting, "And me!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. The soldier hesitated, the weight of choice heavy on his face. At last he lowered his weapon. "We cannot change the world today," he said. "But perhaps she has already begun to change it." With that, the patrol turned away, leaving the village in uneasy peace. That night, the farmhouse glowed with firelight. The widow sat wrapped in blankets, her wounds healing slowly. The father sat near her, silent but close. The little girl leaned against them both, smiling with sleepy eyes. For the first time since the war, the widow felt safe, not because she was hidden, but because she was accepted. The villagers still watched with wary eyes, but some began to nod in quiet respect when they saw her working. In the field, some even brought gifts of food, awkward but sincere. Slowly, suspicion turned to something softer. She was still different, still alien, but she was no longer alone. One evening, when the sky burned with sunset, the widow stood outside the farmhouse. The father joined her, his hands rough, his face steady. "You could still leave," he said softly. "You could find your people." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "My people are gone," she whispered. "But maybe I have found something else." He did not speak, but his hand brushed against hers. The touch was small, but it carried more than words. The little girl burst from the door, laughing. "See, I told you," she cried. "You should marry my dad. Then we can eat together. Forever." The widow laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her heart ached, but it was not the ache of hunger or grief. It was the ache of love, fragile but real. She looked at the man, at the child, at the farmhouse behind them, and, in that moment, she knew her husband's death had left her broken, but life had given her another chance, not to forget, but to begin again. She squeezed the man's hand, her voice soft. "Maybe this is what home feels like." The wind carried the words across the fields, and for the first time, the alien widow did not feel like a stranger. She felt like she belonged. Not because of blood, not because of war, but because humanity had chosen her, and she had chosen them.